So without any further ado, welcome to the month of Metroid. Shit! For the final part of my month of Metroid, I'm going to be taking a look at what is easily considered to be the most controversial game in the series in Metroid Other M. Now, as a giant fan of the series myself, I was cautiously optimistic about the different direction Other M was taking. Is it as bad as some people make it out to be, or is the hate completely overblown? Well... Metroid Other M was first announced at the end of Nintendo's E3 2009 presentation to the surprise of myself and many others. What was even more surprising was that the game was being co-developed by Team Ninja, the developer behind games like Ninja Gaiden, the Dead or Alive fighting franchise, and, oh yeah, those beach volleyball games. Not exactly the first team you'd think of to help collaborate on a big title like Metroid. Nevertheless, I was extremely excited as it looked like Metroid was making its way back into a more traditional style third-person game with a much stronger focus on story. Billed as a true sequel to Super Metroid, I couldn't help but imagine all the possibilities of a deep story to build on the Metroid universe and lore. What followed after the game's release in 2010 was a complete bloodbath of hate around forums everywhere over the direction of the new story and how it portrayed Samus. Without a doubt, the story of Metroid Other M is easily the single most talked about subject in the game. Obviously, this isn't without reason, as this is the first Metroid game to have such a strong focus on its story elements, and it's the first Metroid game to ever give Samus a true voice. The opinions from fans are split, some saying Other M completely ruined Samus as a character, while others say it wasn't that bad, but the majority of players seem to be on the side of the story not being very good. What do I think? Well, I also don't think the story is very good either, although I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. There are plenty of videos all over YouTube about why the story of Metroid Other M doesn't do the series justice, so I'm not going to go in depth with all that stuff, but I did want to go over some of the more controversial moments in the story. And yeah, there's going to be spoilers, so you've been warned. I want to get something out of the way first. Other M is not sexist. Samus isn't made to be some completely subservient woman. There are so many arguments that arise around the topic of Samus having to take orders from Adam Malkovich, the commander of the Galactic Federation Army. She has all of her abilities available to her at the outset, but throughout the game she must get authorization from Adam to use such abilities. This was obviously added to the game as a tool for progression, contrasted with the previous Metroid games, where you'd somehow lose all your abilities and have to subsequently find them all. It's not some sort of male domination thing where Samus is taking orders from a man strictly because he's a male figure, even though some might see it that way. As Samus arrives on the derelict battleship due to the distress signal she receives, she meets up with the Galactic Federation Army. She agrees to work alongside them on this mission, where she also must follow their guidelines and regulations. Just because she's an independent bounty hunter doesn't mean she doesn't have to follow these guidelines when working with the Federation. With that being said, there are some truly awful moments as a result of this progression system that really had me scratching my head. The worst offender and the one people talk about most is when Samus has to explore a hot molten area where she loses health because she doesn't have her Varia suit. Only after exploring the entire area and having to face the boss does Adam grant her permission to enable the Varia suit. This was a completely ridiculous moment in the game, and one that's frankly shameful. To go along with that, we also can't forget about that scene. Why? So let me get this straight. Samus, who has up until this point previously destroyed a form of Ridley 4 other times with no hesitation, suddenly freezes due to fear? No, that doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. I don't even find the fact that they showed a flashback to her as a baby demeaning. Just the pure fact that she would freeze up at a moment like that is dumb. These are the types of things in Other M that just had me shaking my head, and they're not the only ones. Other than these questionable moments in the game, the rest of the story is tolerable at best. The voice acting is average, although Samus's performance is particularly disappointing.
What do you mean?
Even with all these issues, it's interesting to think about why so many fans think Samus's portrayal in the game ruined her as a character. It can't be because her voice acting was bad, or the fact that she took orders from Adam. No, I think it's deeper than that. Many fans, including myself, had sort of created our own version of Samus throughout the years based on our own imagination and beliefs. Many most likely saw her as an emotionless, badass bounty hunter who's not afraid of anything, and when a game like Other M comes along and tries to give her some human emotion, we perceive that as a weakness in the character. Is she now weak just because she shows actual emotion towards things and people who she cares for? I don't think so. Let's not forget that through the entirety of the game, you're still going around and destroying enemies like the Queen Metroid, with little help from others. I'd say that's still pretty badass. I think that's enough about the story though. It's certainly not great, and it's definitely underwhelming, but I wanted to talk about a part of Metroid Other M that doesn't get quite enough attention. The gameplay of the game. With much of the focus being on the story, so many people fail to realize that hidden under all this controversy, there's actually a pretty fun game to be played. Being co-developed by Team Ninja, it's no surprise that the gameplay of Metroid Other M is much faster paced and action-packed than most other Metroid games before it. Holding the Wii Remote sideways like an NES controller, you'll be able to perform really flashy finishers and dodges throughout the game with ease. While it does feel kind of awkward controlling a character in a 3D space with the D-pad, you soon get used to it, although I do wish there was an option to use the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. Because you're in this 3D space and lack the necessary precision, your shots will auto-target the enemy nearest to where you're aiming. This actually works a lot better than it might sound, and running quickly through areas shooting at enemies feels great. Shooting missiles, on the other hand, though, is a different story. To do this, you have to point your Wii Remote forward and aim using the Wii sensor bar, and while you're doing this, you can't move at all. It's really jarring having to change the way you hold the controller every time you need to shoot missiles. This method of control is also used during the few pixel hunt portions of the game that everyone seems to dread. I honestly didn't have too much of an issue with these sections, as most of the time I thought it was pretty obvious as to what you were supposed to be looking at. Boss fights for the most part are also a strong point of Other M, with only a few exceptions. Traversing the bottle ship is fast and easy, as Samus feels extremely agile, more so than she ever has. Platforming also feels great, as you have precise control of Samus's jumping throughout the adventure. But even though the game is a lot of fun to play, you always get that sense that there's something just not quite right. The biggest problem with Other M isn't its story or the way it portrays Samus or anything like that. It's the fact that it doesn't feel like a Metroid game. I have no problems with the Metroid franchise changing things up, whether it be with the combat or the story, but one thing should always stay constant in Metroid games: the exploration. Other M ditches the sense of freedom so many Metroid titles before it have given the player for a much more linear approach this time around. There's still some backtracking and stuff, but for the most part, you'll be directed to exactly where you need to go next, with the game even going as far as to completely locking doors behind you so you can't go back. It's a stark contrast to the big open environments of the Metroid Prime series, and it's easily the biggest downfall of Other M, for me at least. The other problem is that the sense of isolation, while still present in many areas, is lessened due to the fact that you know at all times you're working with the Federation. This may seem like a small issue to some, but if you haven't noticed by now, I think that's a pretty important factor for a Metroid game. Visually, the game still looks quite good, with many of the different environmental themes you'd come to expect from a Metroid game, although it is missing a lot of the liveliness and is a bit more boring than the environments in the Prime series or other Metroid games. The CG cutscenes, on the other hand, are beautifully done. I also like the direction they tried to take with the sound design, with most of the music being more ambient tracks. It fits for a Metroid game, but also takes away some of the personality other games before it had. It's also too bad that the music is hard to notice while playing the game. Metroid Other M isn't a very good Metroid game, but it's not a bad game either. I think the amount of hate it gets is completely undeserved. It has a ton of flaws, especially with the story, but it's still fun to play. Just don't go in expecting a masterpiece. I'm never doing a month of anything ever again.
Remember me? Remember me? Remember me?